Okay, so it looks like we are live and ready to talk about World Suicide Prevention Day 2023. So yes, thanks for joining me this Sunday morning. If you've got out of bed and you're watching live on YouTube, please let me know in the comment section where you're joining us from, what led you to be here today, and yeah, of course, hit the like button if you're getting value. So. My name's Matt Balfour. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm a well-being content creator, mental health first aid instructor, and proud founder of a company called Let's Go Wellbeing. So we predominantly help companies to create more engaged, healthier workforces with a reduced cost of absence. Mostly that's through the delivery of mental health first aid training, but also through the delivery of various wellbeing and inclusion workshops. And yeah, today it's a pleasure to be joining you this Sunday morning as we observe World Suicide Prevention Day 2023. So a bit of reassurance before we get into things in terms of the purpose of this stream. It's again, primarily to inform and educate about how we go about preventing suicide. So we won't be talking about any specific methods over the next kind of half hour or so. So yeah, what is World Suicide Prevention Day, and what should you expect on today's stream? So World Suicide Prevention Day, as you're aware, is observed on September the 10th every year and aims to promote worldwide commitment to action that prevents suicide. It's a day to remind us, or it's there to remind us that there's always an alternative to suicide, and aims to inspire confidence and light in us all. So in terms of today's agenda, what we're going to be watching, what we're going to be talking about is firstly the prevalence of suicide in the UK. We're going to be talking about some of the risk factors. There's also about how to have supportive conversations, and also how to go about signposting people towards appropriate professional help. So in terms of prevalence, what are we looking at? Well, every year there are over 5,000 registered deaths by suicide in the UK. And on average, 75% of that number are men aged between the ages of 45 and 54. Sadly, this is representative of a fairly consistent theme over the last decade. So for example, in 10 out of the last 11 years, if we're looking up and down the UK, London has had the lowest suicide rate of any region in England, with 6.6 deaths per 100,000. But if we get this onto the stage now, so this is a report from the Office of National Statistics, and it just talks about, it's released every year, and it's talking about, again, the statistics of deaths by suicide in the UK. So again, trends over the last 10 years or so. In 10 out of the previous 11 years, London has had the lowest suicide rate of any region in England. Conversely, again, mirroring this on the other side for the last 10 years, the Northeast has had deaths of 14.1 deaths per 100,000 in 2021 and over the last decade or so. Also contained in this, I'm not sure if it's this report, it's another one that I'm going to pull up a bit later on, but essentially you see a bit of a trend that highlights the link between a person's socioeconomic background, their relationship with alcohol, and the likelihood that they will experience poorer mental health outcomes. So for example, the stat about the highest rate being in the Northeast is also mirrored when you look at the average household income across the UK. So deaths by suicide were lowest in London. Conversely, the average household income in areas Kensington, Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham is 60k per year and above, whereas the average household income in Durham, Tyneside and Sunderland is under 17,000. In addition, alcohol-specific deaths by region, just to give you an idea as to the link here, alcohol-specific deaths by region was also highest in the Northeast, with 20.4 deaths per 100,000. So again, just highlighting that link between the person's socioeconomic background, relationship with alcohol, and the likelihood that they would experience poorer mental health outcomes. So I guess just leading on from what I mentioned there about alcohol, and I guess the fact that it's a risk factor, it's a risk factor for death by suicide. Other risk factors include, or other than excessive drinking, include substance misuse, eating disorders, previous attempts, that's a big one as well, acute life events such as bereavement or job loss, alongside social stigma. So what do we mean by social stigma? So social stigma includes attitudes, misconceptions and language used when we're talking about mental health. So, for example, just for clarity here, if somebody expresses an intent to end life, then we would describe that as a suicidal thought or ideation. If somebody acts on those thoughts, whether the outcome is life or death, then we would describe that as a suicide attempt. But there are some terms that we want to avoid using or steer away from using, such as completed suicide, because it has an element of success to it. When you complete something, it's like you complete a video game, you complete a book, you complete a university degree. It's not the type of language that you necessarily want to be using in relation to death by suicide. Another one that you may want to steer away from is the term committed suicide. It's widely used, and it's not necessarily a malicious thing, but there's a couple of reasons why you'd want to steer away from using it. Number one is because it relates back to a time when taking life in the UK was a crime. However, as you can see here, as per the Suicide Act of 1961, and you'll see under item number 1 there, the rule by where it is a crime for a person to commit suicide is hereby abrogated, which means to repeal or do away with. So I'm bringing this up not to demonize anybody that may have used this term previously, because you hear it every day. It's more about raising awareness of how the words we use when we're talking about mental health can inadvertently impact others and lead into some of that social stigma that I mentioned earlier. So another risk factor that I wanted to bring to your attention was loneliness. Okay. So loneliness is I'll just get that report for. So effectively, this report that I've got here, it was a 9-year longitudinal study that it included how many people? 500,000 people, and it was a study of living alone, loneliness, lack of perceived emotional support, and as predictors of suicide and self-harm. Okay. So it showed that loneliness itself was linked to premature mortality, mental ill health, and increased use of mental health services. It also showed that men either living alone or with a non-partner were both at an increased risk of suicide. Results up for you there. So in and around, you can see item number 3 and 3.1 there. So yeah, it showed that men specifically, either living alone or with a non-partner, were both at an increased risk of suicide, whereas a lack of perceived emotional support and subjective loneliness were linked to an increased risk of hospitalization and self-harm in both men and women. So the report suggests that addressing loneliness in the general population may reduce the risk of self-harm, but specifically for death by suicide, which is what we're talking about today, there's a much more complex and gender-specific relationship between loneliness, living arrangements, and a lack of perceived emotional support. For me, it begs the question, I mean, aside from loneliness, what else are driving these gender-specific nuances? Because We know that 75% of the kind of 5,000 people that die every year by suicide are men. So just going back to the report on suicides in England and Wales. So yeah, 5,000 people dying by suicide every year, but 75% of them are men. And I did some research. I kind of went back over the last 10 years of reports from the ONS, and it is a statistic that is mirrored over the last decade. It's always around 75%, some 72, some 74, but it's always around 75%. 2021, for example, was, off the top of my head, I believe it was 5,583 people total, and 4,129 of them were men. So, we've kind of looked at already the link between poverty, alcohol misuse, and the likelihood that a person will die by suicide. So if we look at alcohol misuse, for example, out of the 9,641 deaths by that were attributed to alcohol in 2021, 6,348 of them were men. So it's an established fact that men are more likely to be overrepresented when it comes to people that are misusing substances. But it just kind of links in here with what we're talking about, because we know alcohol misuse specifically is a risk factor for death by suicide. So again, out of the 9,641 deaths in 2021 that were where alcohol was directly responsible, 6,348 of them were men. In addition, I guess another thought as to why men are kind of overly represented in the statistics there is that men are more likely to use violent methods when acting on suicidal thoughts. There's another thought that comes to mind when it comes to why men are, I guess, overrepresented here, and it comes down to actually a book that I read earlier this year. So the book is called Softer Success. It's by a lady called Cara DeLange. And actually the book is primarily aimed and focused at working women who want to find a way to get a bit more balance in their lives while managing transitions with hormones, work life, family life, relationships. And through this book, she's put, through her experience, a way that women can achieve a better balance for themselves and therefore a softer success. So the book called Softer Success. However, there is a chapter in there where it talks about the differences between how, as men and women, we handle stress and how we react to stress. And it talks about a potential biomechanical predisposition that we have as men to maybe not open up as much. Without going into too much detail, the top and the tail of it was that when we are stressed, obviously there are hormones involved as cortisol and adrenaline. That's well known. What I didn't realize, and what this book taught me, was that there's another hormone involved, which is called oxytocin. I guess it's like the body's way of balancing things out, because cortisol and adrenaline make you act and are pessimistic, whereas oxytocin, it's known as the love hormone. It makes people bond. It's associated with intimacy. So what the book says is that estrogen, which is the female hormone, actually enhances the effects of oxytocin, right? Whereas testosterone actually suppresses the effects of oxytocin, meaning that on some level, alongside everything else that I've mentioned, there is some sort of biochemical predisposition that we have to maybe not wanting to reach out to people as often when we're stressed out. So some food for thought there. There is actually a review of that book, Softer Success, on the channel if you want to check that out at a later point after the stream, obviously. So I also wanted to touch upon how we go about having supportive conversations in and around the subject of suicide. A question that comes up quite often is, and I guess it's almost a bit of a misconception, is, will asking the person directly about suicide increase the chances of them acting on those thoughts? And that is a common misconception. It's actually more likely that if you have the rapport in the relationship to actually ask somebody about their suicidal thoughts or intentions, you're actually going to create an environment where they feel like they've actually got permission to get a weight off their shoulders and actually open up and talk more about their experience, which hopefully leads to you being able to guide them towards appropriate help. So yeah, just wanted to clear that one up about this misconception in terms of asking directly about suicide. But some other things to be aware of, because you can't just obviously ask people about, you know, how they're feeling or what they're thinking. You need to have a rapport. You need to be genuine, and you need to have a rapport. It's essential to, well, rapport itself is essential to having a person-centered conversation with the person that you want to help. And at the same time, we need to remember that the way that we say things, that's our body language, our pitch, our tone, our pace, our inflection, how we say things directly correlates to the response that we receive from other people or from the other person. On top of that, in terms of empathizing and putting yourself in their shoes, your ability to project a genuine interest at understanding another person's situation and desire to improve it could be the difference between a person feeling like they can open up and share the problem versus, you know, kind of withdrawing, keeping it to themselves and suffering in silence effectively. So after you have had a supportive conversation, bearing those things in mind, it might be appropriate to, you know, have a bit of a plan. So as a follow-up action, you can formulate a plan with this person that can almost act as a bit of a safety net the next time they may be experiencing suicidal thoughts. So this could be, you know, the plan could be based or triggered by a simple word or a phrase that, you know, the person and their inner circle agree on, that triggers safeguarding measures that can be taken, you know, on the person's behalf. Another thing to consider when and if you do have a kind of supportive conversation about suicide or mental health, more broadly speaking, but obviously for this conversation, we're talking about suicide, is the practice of self-care. Okay, so self-care is the practice of engaging in activities that actively manage our health. It's unique, individual, and naturally changes over time. But the reason I bring it up is because it's not uncommon for people to identify behaviorally and psychologically with the traumatic experiences of another following continued exposure. This in counseling circles is known as vicarious trauma. So take a moment to consider how you might feel before and after the conversation. Also, alongside which coping strategies that you have available in order to keep your kind of stress container empty and prevent your own mental health from becoming a problem. Actually, as well, if you're struggling for ideas or you want just some inspiration because you want to add something new into the mix in terms of how you practice self-care, there's also a video that I recommend you check out on the channel. It's called 40 Examples of Self-Care. And yeah, we go through sort of physical well-being, mental well-being, holistic well-being, creative, educational. There's a lot of examples of self-care on there, but yeah, check it out in your own time. So another thing that I think you should be aware of as and when before and after you're having a supportive conversation about mental health and suicide is not going in and wanting to fix things. Okay, because what do I mean by that? Well, it might be hard to accept, but actually not everybody wants to be helped. Not everything can be fixed. And, you know, when and if somebody opens up about their suicidal thoughts or feelings, it can be really tempting as the person on the receiving end of that information to want to swoop in and fix the problem. And as much as this is a natural response, it could actually have the opposite effect. So, in terms of your eagerness to actually, want to swoop in and help, you may end up giving out unsolicited advice, which we never want to do. One, because we're not professionals, and two, because what is good advice for one person may be catastrophic for another. Okay. So you may give out unsolicited advice or guidance. You may even make a person feel worse about their experience. So the thing to be aware of when you're having a supportive conversation about suicide is that, instead of fix things, it's much more important that you let the person know that you're there to listen to them, to understand them and their situation in a non-judgmental capacity. Really focus on empathizing with the individual and creating a safe space for them to feel validated. After you've had a supportive conversation, it may be appropriate to signpost sources of help. So with that in mind, you've got things like the Samaritans. They actually offer a free confidential helpline where you can be connected with a volunteer at any one of their kind of 200 branches UK-wide. You can also contact other sources of support, such as listed on the NHS Help for Suicidal Thoughts webpage. You've also got the Hub of Hope, which I think gets slept on a little bit. I don't really hear many people talking about it, or at least the awareness I don't think is where it should be. I mean, this week, for example, I was in a room with 1, 2, 3, 4. In the 2-day period, I probably spoke to 100 kind of senior managers in an organization that I deliver mental health awareness training to. And none of them were aware of this thing called the Hub of Hope. So what is the Hub of Hope? It is essentially a mental health directory. The way it works is that you can put in the concerns for either yourself or the person that you're trying to help. Just say it was, well, the concerns, it doesn't matter. There's loads of concerns to pick from. You can select up to 3 concerns. What the website will then do is then provide you with a search engine results page. You can enter a postcode as well, by the way. So it's the concerns, then the postcode. And then what you can do is enter, it will show you it will generate a search engine results page that will give you a list of mental health service providers based on proximity and relevance to your search. So yeah, the Hub of Hope, definitely give that a go. I believe if you're a mental health first aider, well, I don't believe, you definitely do get this. As a mental health first aider, you get access to this through the MHFADA support app. Okay, so you get quick access to this through the MHFADA support app if you are trained up as a mental health first aider. But you also can just go to the website directly, and it's exactly the same service. So everybody can benefit from the Hub of Hope if you choose to go that route. Lastly, as well, when it comes to kind of getting a person to the help that they need, if you think that person is at risk to themselves or others, then make sure you call the emergency services. So I just wanted to also touch on, I guess, how we go about continuing the conversation about mental health in the workplace. So with that in mind, think about the tools. Think proactively about the tools you have available to make it easier for people to access the help that they need. Okay, so what might they be in the workplace? Well, this could be an employee assistance program. Okay, this could be an employee resource group. You may have wellbeing champions. You might even have a core of mental health first aiders. So it's really about just being aware of those tools that you have available in the workplace. And how to access them in a timely fashion, so that when and if you do have a supportive conversation with somebody, or you need to have a supportive conversation with somebody and get them to the help that they need, it's not a surprise to try and it's not a surprise or some sort of mystery to try and find the pathways within your organization. Okay. So I'd also like you to remember that mental health is always a person-centered conversation. Like I said earlier, what is well-meant advice for one person could be catastrophic for another. So, be aware of unconscious bias and how previous experience can blind a person to what's in front of them. Okay. And lastly, subscribe to this channel because we produce content that is dedicated to answering questions about mental health in the workplace, specifically your questions about mental health in the workplace. Okay. So please smash the like button and give this live stream a share if you got value this morning. And remember that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Thanks for listening.